Marcus Vallon had everything: wealth, power, charm, and a gambler's grin that could convince the world he'd never lose. But beneath the tailored suits and luxury towers, a hunger grew, one that no fortune could feed. This is the story of a man who bet against fate, doubled down on delusion, and lost it all. Not in a single night, but one desperate wager at a time. Hello family, welcome to Storytime with Imzi. Please subscribe and leave a like for us. It means the world to us. Also share this video to your friends and loved ones and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. Marcus Vallon wasn't born poor, but he wasn't born with wealth either. His father ran a modest tailoring shop on the outskirts of the city, and his mother worked nights cleaning office buildings. From an early age, Marcus understood that money was power, and that his family had none of it. By the time he was 16, Marcus was already bartering used electronics at flea markets, marking up prices for tourists with slick talk and manufactured charm. He learned early how to read people, their fears, their wants, their weaknesses. Most importantly, he learned how to exploit those things. While his peers chased college degrees, Marcus chased margins. He never cared for classrooms. He saw textbooks as prisons for the imagination and lectures as detours from profit. By 25, he owned 3 pawnshops. By 30, he'd flipped his earnings into real estate, mostly foreclosures, bought cheap from desperate sellers. He sold hope for double the price, and they paid it. People don't want homes, he once said to a young employee. They want stories. Sell the dream, not the drywall. He built a name for himself as a self-made mogul. His face appeared in business magazines. His quotes were passed around LinkedIn like gospel, and people came to him for advice they'd never be able to follow. Everything he touched seemed to turn to gold. But Marcus never felt it was enough. Every milestone felt hollow the moment he achieved it. Each deal that closed only left him hungry for the next one. His houses grew bigger, his watches heavier, his suits sharper. Yet he never paused to enjoy anything. There was always another zero to chase. He looked at the world and saw it as a game, one where most people were pawns and he was destined to be the king. Empathy, patience, and caution were virtues he deemed fit for those who couldn't win. For Marcus, the only virtue was victory. He began investing in things just to say he did: wine, art, rare coins. He didn't understand them, nor care to. What mattered was status. What mattered was being above. People whispered about how he got certain properties, how former business partners seemed to vanish, how competitors suddenly went bankrupt. But no one asked too many questions. He had lawyers for that, and a smile so confident, it made people doubt their own suspicions. At age 40, Marcus stood at the top of a high-rise balcony, sipping a $3,000 bottle of champagne and looking over the city skyline as if it were his board game. The cars were pawns, the buildings were trophies, and the people below, well, they were just the background noise of his success. In that moment, bathed in golden city light, with money, power, and reputation at his fingertips, Marcus felt invincible. But even kings forget that the board has rules. And Marcus never noticed the storm forming at the edge of the horizon. It began, as many dangerous things do, with a stroke of luck. Marcus had flown to Monaco for a real estate summit. The event was lavish, predictably tedious, and filled with handshakes from men who smelled of power and desperation. Marcus didn't need new investors, he needed a thrill. And he found it tucked beneath the golden chandeliers of the Casino de Monte Carlo. He wasn't unfamiliar with casinos. He had walked through a few in Las Vegas, sipping cocktails and mocking the gamblers who hunched over tables like addicts at confessionals. "Gambling is for the desperate," he once told a friend, "and I'm never desperate." But this night was different. Monaco had an elegance that charmed even Marcus. The men wore tuxedos like armor. The women dripped in diamonds and confidence. Everything was velvet, glass, and possibility. He was drawn in not by need, but by curiosity. He approached the roulette table, chips clacking and dealers calling bets like auctioneers. Marcus exchanged a few euros, almost carelessly, for chips. He placed a small stack on black, mostly just to say he'd tried it. The wheel spun. Black 12. He smirked. Beginner's luck. He doubled the bet. The wheel spun again. Black 28. He raised an eyebrow, amused. Someone handed him a glass of Dom Perignon. He kept playing. 20 minutes passed, then 40. His small stack had grown into a respectable tower. Other players began to notice him. A woman in red leaned close and called him Monsieur Chance. Marcus left the table 2 hours later with a grin on his face and 75,000 euros in his pocket. The amount wasn't life-changing, not for him, but the feeling was. It wasn't the money that thrilled him. It was the control. The idea that, with a flick of the wrist and a flicker of instinct, he could beat the house. The casino wasn't just a playground, it was a challenge. One he was suddenly very interested in. The next night, he skipped the Summit's black-tie dinner and returned to the casino. He was greeted like royalty. They offered him a private table, complimentary drinks, and a concierge who remembered his name. He felt like a god. This time, he played baccarat. He'd never touched the game before, but it didn't matter. Numbers were numbers, odds were just math, and Marcus trusted his instincts more than any rule book. He won again. Not as much as the first night, but enough to feed the fire. By the end of his 3-day stay, Marcus had turned a modest gamble into over 200,000 euros. He hadn't even touched his real wealth. It was all play money, profit from leisure. A game. On the flight home, he reclined in first class with a glass of scotch and a sense of discovery. Business had always been a grind. Winning had always come with paperwork, negotiation, delay. But this? Gambling was pure. No contracts. No meetings. Just risk and reward. Immediate. Absolute. He thought about Monaco for days after returning to his penthouse. The thrill. The surge. The seductive sense of beating a system designed to beat others. It gnawed at the back of his mind like a whisper. What if you kept going? What if this is the real game? He started visiting local casinos. Small bets at first, just to scratch the itch. But anyone who's played the tables knows. Scratching an itch only makes it worse. Marcus no longer bothered to pretend gambling was a hobby. It had become his secret second career. Only now the stakes were bigger, the lies deeper, and the hunger impossible to satisfy. At first, he kept his visits to weekends. A few hours at the private tables. High-limit poker, baccarat, the occasional reckless spin at the roulette wheel. He told himself it was entertainment, a reward for long work weeks and heavier responsibilities. But the truth was, he had begun to crave the rush of risk more than the satisfaction of profit. Then weekends bled into weekdays. He started missing meetings, sending proxies to close deals he once would have micromanaged. When his assistant questioned his frequent off-grid hours, Marcus fired her. A few murmurs spread among his partners and advisors, but they were quickly drowned by Marcus's signature charisma and ever-present money. Business is about instinct, he would say with a wolfish smile, brushing off questions. Sometimes I trust the numbers. Sometimes I become the numbers. He began flying to Macau, Singapore, and Las Vegas, not for business, but for the tables. Casinos welcomed him with penthouse suites, chauffeurs, and velvet ropes that opened just for him. He became one of those players, the VIP whales who never looked at the chip denominations and ordered scotch older than most of the waitstaff. But unlike the seasoned high rollers, Marcus wasn't calculating. He was chaotic. His bets were impulsive, his strategies non-existent. He believed in gut feeling, in energy, in the universe favoring the bold. And when he lost, he never walked away. He doubled down. Always. Soon, the profits from his businesses could no longer support his new lifestyle. So he did what gamblers always do before the fall. He dipped into the foundation. He sold a few smaller properties. Quietly. Liquidated stocks. When those weren't enough, he restructured loans under shell companies to buy time. His financial advisors grew nervous. His accountant sent long emails with red flags and charts that showed increasing burn rates and unsustainable debt. Marcus didn't read them. He saw everything as temporary. Every loss was a prelude to a massive win. Every cold streak was just the universe testing him. He believed a breakthrough was just one table away. "You don't lose until you quit," he often muttered to himself, a mantra that hardened into delusion. His businesses began to suffer. Once thriving rental properties went into disrepair. Tenants complained. Maintenance was delayed. Revenue dipped. Employees stopped getting paid on time. Still, Marcus didn't stop. He started borrowing, not just from banks, but from private lenders with tight suits and tighter smiles. People who didn't care about business plans, only repayment. He offered collateral. He made promises. He wrote checks with swagger and lies. One night in Macau, he lost $900,000 in 6 hours. He sat in the smoking lounge afterward, staring at his empty glass, his hands trembling. A casino host offered him another drink, sensing weakness. Marcus looked up, smiled faintly, and said, "Put another $500,000 on the line. I'll win it back." The host hesitated, then nodded. That was the moment something shifted. The casino saw what Marcus refused to see. He wasn't a player anymore. He was prey. It came fast. Not like the slow erosion Marcus had always imagined ruin would be, but like a trapdoor under his feet. One night in Las Vegas, inside a sleek private room at the Ardent, a casino known for its ruthless elegance, Marcus arrived in a charcoal suit, shoes that glistened like obsidian, and a mind already burning with the numbers he planned to play. He hadn't slept well in days. His appetite was gone, but the fire in his chest still roared. He walked to the high-limit baccarat table, nodding to the pit boss like a king returning to his throne. The room was silent except for the soft rustle of cards and the faint clinking of crystal glasses. He bought in with $2 million, wired in advance through a borrowed line of credit from a lender in Hong Kong who'd started calling twice a week. The first few hands were brutal. The cards came cold. Banker wins. Player loses. Tie. Banker again. Marcus raised the stakes each time, refusing to retreat. He changed dealers. Changed chairs. Changed shoes. Even superstition is easy to mock until you're desperate. Within 2 hours, $1.6 million was gone. He paused, eyes glassy, palms sweating. His fingers tapped a rhythm on the felt table. The casino host stood nearby, unreadable behind a professional smile. The room felt tighter, smaller. The silence was now oppressive. Marcus muttered, "Last bet." He shoved the rest of his chips forward. All in. The cards were dealt. He stared at the totals. 5-7. The house won. It was over. The host placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Mr. Vallon, would you like a car brought around?" Marcus blinked. He looked down at the empty space before him, then up at the ceiling. He nodded. Outside, Las Vegas burned with neon and noise, but Marcus felt none of it. He sat in the back of the Rolls-Royce like a ghost in a coffin, the leather too soft, the silence too loud. He checked his phone. For missed calls from his lender. 1 from his CFO. 2 from an old friend he hadn't spoken to in months. He let them ring again. At the hotel, he poured a drink. Then another. He stared at the city lights and told himself the same lie all gamblers tell after a loss. I'll win it back. But something was different this time. The fear crept in, not the fear of losing money, but the fear that the illusion had finally cracked. Over the next week, Marcus sold 2 properties in Miami at a loss. He closed one of his companies to free up cash. The board of another voted to suspend his executive authority, pending financial review. He showed up to the office in a rage, screaming about loyalty and legacy. Half the staff resigned that day. The vultures had started to circle. He returned to Vegas, clawing at the tables with desperation instead of confidence. The dealers noticed. The hosts noticed. The casino noticed. His bets grew more erratic. His appearance became disheveled. His name, once said with admiration in those halls, was now spoken with pity, or worse, indifference. He was no longer a force. He was just another man chasing ghosts with borrowed time. Marcus had built his empire on sharp instincts and sharper deals. But now survival required something darker: deceit. The moment he began to lie, the fall accelerated. It started with minor manipulations. He edited quarterly reports, tweaking numbers just enough to reassure his investors. Temporary liquidity issue, he explained during a call, his voice smooth as glass. We're restructuring to increase agility. No one dared question him. Not yet, but lies have a way of multiplying. As the debts grew louder, Marcus spun new stories to silence the noise. He faked purchase orders, created shell companies, and named phantom buyers in imaginary international real estate deals. He convinced a venture capitalist to invest $5 million in a project that didn't exist, promising exclusive land rights in Eastern Europe. He forged the documents himself, shaking slightly as he signed a false name. He used the money not to build, but to cover loans, pay interest, and return to the casinos. The money was always for one last play, just enough to reverse the tide. Just one more win, then he'd clean up the mess. But the win never came. Soon, even his closest allies grew suspicious. One of his former partners, Lucien Drev, demanded a full audit after catching discrepancies in shared assets. Marcus stalled, claimed delays at the accounting firm, and booked a sudden emergency trip to Dubai to dodge confrontation. His assistant, his third one in 6 months, quit after overhearing him shout into the phone, "I don't care if it's illegal. Find a way to make it look clean." Rumors spread like smoke. Investors whispered. Clients pulled out. Bankers grew cautious. His reputation, once airtight, had started to fray. And yet, Marcus kept up appearances. Luxury cars, tailored suits, private flights. But behind the scenes, he was pawning assets, cashing out insurance policies, and begging for extensions from private lenders with names like Crane and Mr. Lin. Men who didn't file lawsuits. They made visits. The walls were closing in. One afternoon, he walked into the lobby of his corporate headquarters and noticed the security guard avoid eye contact. On the 28th floor, the lights in the legal department were off. No one had told him. He called HR. The line was disconnected. The truth was leaking out faster than he could plug the holes. And so the lies escalated. He forged a wire confirmation to convince a bank his next payment was on the way. He promised his lender collateral he no longer owned. He told his mother, in a rare phone call, that everything was fine and business was booming. Then, the worst moment, he forged his father's signature on an old property deed still held in the family trust. The guilt was immediate, sharp, and cold. But it passed. Desperation has a way of erasing shame. That night, alone in his penthouse with the curtains drawn and the lights off, Marcus stared at the glowing city and said aloud, "It's just temporary. I'll fix it all. I always do." But the city didn't respond. It just kept shining, for someone else. There was no single explosion, no dramatic crash with screaming headlines or sirens wailing. The collapse of Marcus Vallon came like a silent avalanche, quiet at first, then unstoppable. It began with a letter. A thick envelope slid under his office door from a law firm he didn't recognize. Inside were formal accusations: fraud, misrepresentation, breach of fiduciary duty. A group of investors had hired forensic accountants. The numbers didn't lie anymore. The mask had slipped. Within 48 hours, his primary bank froze all active accounts. The dominoes fell in quick succession. First, his creditors called in their loans. Every one of them. The polite bankers sent official notices. The private lenders sent men in black coats, who watched him from parked cars. His phone lit up with unfamiliar numbers, unknown cities. Then came the media. A leak somewhere, maybe an ex-employee, maybe an angry investor. His name hit the financial news like a spark in dry brush. Marcus Vallon under investigation. Blogs, podcasts, social feeds, everywhere. The wolves he once ran with vanished. His name, once spoken with admiration, now brought sneers. Property after property was repossessed. His penthouse went first, auctioned within days. He was escorted out by security. The doorman, who used to greet him like royalty, couldn't even look him in the eye. His fleet of cars disappeared from the underground garage. His art was seized in a legal raid. Even his private jet was grounded in Zurich for unpaid maintenance. Then the investigators came. Not just financial auditors, but federal agents, stiff-suited and silent-eyed, combing through files, servers, and bank records. They arrived with warrants, not questions. Marcus watched them move through his hollowed-out offices like surgeons dissecting a corpse. No one returned his calls. His lawyer dropped him. He tried to book a flight, but his passport had been flagged. He called a friend, one of the few who hadn't yet cut ties, and asked for help. There was a long pause. Then a cold voice replied, "I can't be seen helping you." The line went dead. It was over. With nowhere else to go, Marcus rented a furnished apartment in the city's forgotten district. Mold on the ceilings, broken heater, neighbors who didn't make eye contact. He wore off-the-rack clothes now, drank cheap whiskey alone. He had stopped shaving, stopped caring. His phone rang less and less. Eventually, it stopped ringing altogether. He walked through the city like a ghost, past towers he once owned, past billboards that used to feature him as a visionary. He would stare at them, heart hollow, and wonder if any of it had ever really been his. Or if he had just been a gambler all along, bluffing through life with nothing but luck and arrogance. One morning, he caught his reflection in a store window. Gaunt face, bloodshot eyes, wrinkled coat. He turned away. That wasn't Marcus Vallon anymore. That was someone else. Someone who had lost everything. The days blurred. Time no longer moved in meetings or milestones, but in the slow rhythm of survival. Marcus Vallon woke late now, often after noon, staring at the cracked ceiling until guilt pushed him out of bed. His morning ritual was reduced to checking a prepaid phone for messages that never came, drinking stale instant coffee, and scrolling through news articles he no longer appeared in. Occasionally, he'd find an article still floating in the feed, one of the many autopsies of his fall. From mogul to mirage, the rise and ruin of Marcus Vallon. He read them all, even the cruel ones. Especially the cruel ones. He had no lawyers left to silence the press. Some days he walked aimlessly. Past the courthouse where he now reported weekly. Past the chain restaurants where middle managers dined. People who now had more stability than he could ever hope to regain. No one recognized him anymore. The sharp suits, the confident gait, the magnetic aura, all gone. He tried to find work. Anything. But his name was radioactive. Every resume sent was met with silence. Every cold call ended in polite rejection. Even shady finance groups wanted nothing to do with a man whose face had once been on the cover of Business Ascend and was now tagged in SEC reports. The only call he'd received in weeks was from a debt collection agency. The voice on the other end wasn't rude, just cold. Efficient. The woman treated him like a file, not a person. Your balance is still outstanding. We've moved to final notice. Do you have any assets left to declare? Marcus almost laughed. Assets? His final watch, a battered Patek Philippe he once called the soul of time, was sold to a pawnshop for a fraction of its worth. He used the money to pay the power bill and buy groceries, canned soup, rice, eggs. The man who once spent 5 figures on a single dinner now counted coins at checkout. His mind, once razor-sharp, began to fray. At night, he lay awake staring at the ceiling fan spinning shadows across the room, replaying every decision, every lie, every bet. What was I thinking? But the answers never came. Only the memories. He remembered the Monaco balcony, champagne in hand. The moment he felt like a god. He remembered the first win, the first lie, the first loss. And now the silence. One night, in a fit of desperation, Marcus walked into a casino again. Not one of the lavish temples of his past, but a dim, smoke-filled basement in a sketchy part of town, full of broken dreams and flickering lights. He had $200 to his name. He sat at the table. The dealer looked at him, not with recognition, just indifference. He played 3 hands, lost all 3. When he stood up, there was no anger, no despair, just emptiness. He walked out into the cold night air and realized something strange. He no longer wanted to win. He just wanted it to end. Winter came early that year. Sharp winds, gray skies, and a silence that clung to the city like fog. In the cold light of December, Marcus Vallon walked the streets unnoticed, his name long since washed from headlines and memory. He had become a specter of his former self. The apartment was still his, though barely. A few payments behind. The landlord had stopped knocking. He knew there was nothing left to squeeze. The furniture was sparse. The walls were bare. The silence was no longer haunting, it was expected. One morning, a thick envelope arrived under the door again, court summons. The fraud charges had stuck. Financial misconduct, forgery, wire fraud. Nothing glamorous. Just paper trails and broken trust. The SEC, the IRS, even international banking regulators had built airtight cases. Marcus had no money for defense. No leverage. No favors left to call. The trial was short. He sat in a second-hand suit that didn't fit, his hair thin, his face hollow. Reporters were present, but not in the way they once had been. There were no headlines this time. Just a few legal blogs noting the sentencing of another fallen entrepreneur. A name now relegated to a cautionary tale. The judge read his crimes aloud. Marcus barely listened. He felt numb. When asked if he wanted to speak, he stood slowly. I thought I was chasing greatness, he said, voice low. But I was just running. From boredom. From fear. From being ordinary. I thought winning meant never stopping. I forgot that sometimes you win by walking away. No one clapped. No one cried. The court sentenced him to 7 years in a federal facility. White collar, minimum security, but prison nonetheless. In his cell, Marcus found something he hadn't felt in years: stillness. There was no roulette wheel. No stock ticker. No urgent emails. No voices whispering about the next big play. Just time. He read books. Long ones. He worked in the kitchen. He kept his bed neat. He stopped lying, to others and eventually to himself. A year into his sentence, he received a letter from his sister. It was short. "I'm glad you're still alive," it said. "I hope you're finding peace." For the first time in a long time, he wept. And that night, as he lay on the hard cot beneath the hum of prison lights, Marcus Vallon whispered something aloud. Not a prayer, not a plea, but a truth. "I had it all, and I gave it away. For nothing." There was no reply, no redemption in sight. But there was honesty. And for a man like Marcus, that was the beginning of something new.